Well, good evening. We are going to begin our show for you in just a few moments, but before we start, just a little information for those of you who are new to Alex. Alex is 23 years old and a recent summa cum laude graduate from Marist College, where he studied history with an emphasis on the Hudson Valley region. He's also completed his graduate degree at Marist in Public Administration last December, so he's come off a very busy time with papers, exams, and many shows and lectures just like today's. He is a published author with articles and essays in the Hudson River Valley Review, the Orange County Historical Society Journal, the American Bottle and Glass Collector magazine, and the New York State Archives magazine. And just this past summer, Alex was informed that another one of his articles will be published later this year in the Journal for the Society of Industrial Archaeology. Additionally, the New York State Archives magazine will be featuring another article by Alex in their summer edition. He was the past president of the Hudson Valley Bottle Club and more recently was elected as president of the Woodbury Historical Society. Alex has been busy with his performances on the cello, which was awarded a grant last summer from the Orange County Arts Council, and much like now, frequently lectures publicly on the topic of regional Hudson Valley history. More recently, Alex holds residencies in Marist, Vassar, and New Paltz colleges, where he teaches adult continuing education classes. In addition, he's on the advisory board for the new Borscht Belt Museum being built in Ellenville, New York, where he recently lectured as well. Alex has been featured on both Spectrum and News 12 cable news programs. He was also notified in February that his work will be featured at Marist College in their 5th edition of For the Record, which is a program that honors students, alumni, faculty, and community members who are anything but the ordinary. Alex's unique story as a high-functioning autistic individual's work as a historian, musician, and community leader will be shared through digital art, portrait photography, video, and the written word. Now, today's performance comes by way of a special request for his Bach to Rock program. Other programs that Alex presents is his heartwarming Broadway celebration, his Valentine's program, there's a fantastic winter holiday celebration, and the frequently requested British invasion of the 60s and 70s. Additional new programs in production include A Night at the Opera, Sinatra, and the Jazz Ambassadors. Well, I see that we're about ready to begin, so without any further delay, would you all please welcome Alex to the stage?
thank you all for being such a wonderful audience on this Thursday evening. That, of course, was My Favorite Things, made famous with The Sound of Music, but also on John Coltrane's noted jazz album, also titled My Favorite Things. Now, of all of Coltrane's different pieces, including his famous jazz standard, Giant Steps, another one of my favorites, it was My Favorite Things that he considered to be his favorite selection of all time.
So going from that 1959 Broadway hit, which was The Sound of Music, we're going to turn the clock back about 220 some years and talk a little bit about Bach. Alex, you want to open up our program and just explain what we're about to do?
Absolutely. For this next step, we're going to travel back in time to the cello suites of Johann Sebastian Bach. Now, for some context, these were written between 1717 and 1723, around the time that Benjamin Franklin was a teenager. Now, each of the cello suites begins with the prelude. There are 6 in total, and the prelude establishes the key and tonalities that follow in the movements afterward that are modeled after dances such as Allemands, Courantes, or Gigues, some of which we'll explore in today's program.
Now, these cello suites were little known and rarely publicly performed until they were recorded by Pablo Casals in the early 20th century. They've since been performed and recorded by many renowned cellists and have been transcribed for numerous other instruments. They are considered some of Bach's greatest musical achievements. For now, the prelude from the G major suite number 1.
Has 2 elements, and the first of those I'd like to demonstrate is showing connections in different genres of music through time. And the first of these is quite a simple connection. What you heard previously was, of course, the prelude from Bach's Suite Number 1 in G major. Now we're going to travel 200 years into the future from a song about 10 years ago known as Bach's Song. It's written by the piano guys. One of my favorites a more contemporary piece, but it takes direct influences from the cello suite you just heard. Now you'll notice I'm going to be taking my shoes off for this next selection. It's not a fashion choice, but you'll see I perform with a bunch of different guitar pedals and other technology in front of my feet. And for this one, we're going to introduce my looping station. We're going to talk about it much more extensively later in the program, but here you'll hear me use the looping station to perform some of my pre-recorded, I guess the best word to say would be version of Bach's song. My pre-recorded arrangements for Bach's song.
So far in today's program, we've sampled Broadway in a style of jazz and then classical updated with a pop sound. Let's explore some of Bach's genius through traditional dance whose origins begin more than 200 years before Bach was around. Our next selection is a traditional jig known to have been played throughout Britain and Ireland. Now, the origins of the Irish washerwoman are far from clear, and several tunes have been cited as possible ancestors. Although the tune has been popularly known as an old and perhaps quintessential Irish jig, it's been proposed by some writers to have been an English country dance tune that was published in the 17th century and probably known as early as the late 16th century. Well, that's around the time of Shakespeare. That's a long-sorted way of simply saying that the tune has been around for quite a long time, and there have been many who have put and left their fingerprints on both the melody and the words. Alex's performance is just another performer's interpretation of this wonderful tune as it marches forward in time. The Irish Washerwoman. Now our next selection is a descendant from that very jig that we've just heard, except instead of being called a jig, J-I-G, in this case it's called a jig, G-I-G-U-E, and perhaps more formalized and fitting in a gilded castle rather than in a boisterous Irish pub. Our next jig comes 200 years later. So what we've heard from the Irish washerwoman evolves into box time as a jig. talk about Irish jigs and Baroque dances like minuets and gavottes, why not cross the Atlantic and maybe head to the southern hemisphere and sample a very different kind of dance? And maybe Alex can explain a little bit more about why he's not wearing shoes and what he's going to do with his feet during this performance.
Yes, for this next piece we'll be taking a trip to Argentina with the composer Astor Piazzolla. He was a bandoneon player, a type of concertina or accordion, and Piazzolla was considered to be, by the New York Times, one of the world's greatest tango composers. Now I mentioned using my looping station to pre-record some arrangements by myself. On this next selection, Astor Piazzolla's Liber Tango, you'll hear me begin with a klezmer-styled introduction, and then there will be 8 underlying themes recorded live in front of you before then I perform the main melody of the tango. In fact, the only part that will not be recorded live are the drums that you will hear.
Now, today's program is titled From Bach to Rock, exploring how powerfully enormous Bach's influence on generations of musicians has and continues to be. Sometimes that connection is more obvious. One such example can be easily demonstrated with Bach's air from his Suite Number 3 and the 1967 pop hit Whiter Shade of Pale by Procol Harum. Both are written in that same moderate 4/4 time signature, and they're both in C major, and they're characterized by a bass line moving stepwise down in a repeated pattern throughout. Alex, can you demonstrate that? Now, in classical music, this kind of bass accompaniment is known as a ground bass. Now, the similarity between the Hammond organ line of Whiter Shade of Pale and J.S. Bach's air from his orchestral Suite Number 3, better known as the air on a G string, is very obvious. Alex, give us a sample of the air on a G string. Now listen for that same bass line in the opening of Whiter Shade of Pale. Now don't take my word for it. Listen to what Gary Brooker, the pianist, lead singer, and founder of the rock group Procol Harum, had to say of his composition. If you trace the chordal element, it does a bar or two of Bach's air on a G string before it veers off. Now that spark was all it took. I wasn't consciously combining rock with classical, it's just that Bach's music was in me. Alex, how about if we hear all of Whiter Shade of Pale?
like to make a bit of a proposal, I think, to travel right to 1964.
1964, well, you know what? That would be something called the British invasion. You've heard a sampling and the length and the depth of some of Alex's repertoire in today's program. We've had some Broadway, some jazz, some classical, some pop. There was even a little bit of Latin with the tango. We have Irish jigs. Well, let me tell you about when a song is written, and if it's special enough, it hangs around waiting for an artist to claim it, putting their indelible stamp on it so that all other versions are henceforth compared to and that one forgettable take. Nobody's sure who wrote House of the Rising Sun. But we do know that the Animals, powered by the bluesy vocals of Eric Burdon, well, they claimed it. House of the Rising Sun has deep roots in American folk history, a history whose tentacles extend even further back to England. Alan Lomax, the noted song collector, claimed that its origin can be traced to 17th century England. Well, whatever its origin, House of the Rising Sun has an impressive line of artists who have recorded this gem. You have Woody Guthrie in 1941, Glenn Yarborough in 1957, Ronnie Gilbert from the Weavers, 1950s, Joan Baez, 1960, and Nina Simone, 1962. Well, in 1964, the Animals recorded their version in simply one take. That's unheard of. It was based on the same chord sequence that Bob Dylan used in his recording. Now, one story has it that when Bob Dylan first heard the recording by the Animals, he jumped out of his car and banged on the hood. This recording apparently inspired Dylan to go from acoustic to electric. Now, some would argue that Dylan going to electric resulted in him being booed on July 25th, 1965 at the Newport Folk Festival. But others, including notable musician Al Cooper, he was there on stage with Dylan, and he disagrees, arguing that the audience was upset by both the poor sound quality and the short duration of the set, just 3 numbers, and not because Dylan went from acoustic to electric. Well, it was in 1964 that the Animals were billed as the opening act for Chuck Berry. Realizing that nobody could out-rock Chuck Berry, the Animals chose a different path and looked to the roots of the blues, the House of the Rising Sun. like to hear about 150 times a year on the road, and it just doesn't get old. You know, it sounded a little bit of Hendrix in there. There might be something happening. So there's a special connection between the Animals, whose selection you just heard, and Cream, which we're about to hear. And in order to tie them all together, let's start a little earlier with the connection to the Rolling Stones. At a performance in New York, Jimi Hendrix met Linda Keith, the then girlfriend of Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones. Now, she really liked Hendrix's performance and pitched him to the Stones' manager and producer, who didn't see anything in him. Linda would later introduce Jimi to Chas Chandler. Now, the bass player of the Animals was Chas Chandler. And the Animals were on the verge of breaking up, and Chandler was interested in becoming a producer. Chandler wasn't immediately impressed, but when Hendrix started playing the guitar with his teeth, he thought, you know, I could do something with him. Hendrix had potential, and Chandler convinced him to travel over to England. England was experiencing the height of the blues influence, and it would be Chandler who would convince Hendrix to change the spelling of his first name from J-I-M-M-Y to J-I-M-I. So there's a different branding going on. Soon after arriving in England on September 24th, 1966, Chandler convinced the guys in Cream to let Jimi sit in with the group. On October 1st, Jimi took the stage with Cream and plugged directly into Jack Bruce's amp to take stage by playing Howlin' Wolf's Killing Floor. Clapton had struggled to learn that piece, but put it aside because it was so difficult. Well, the rock group Cream, they were part of that British invasion of the 60s. This next song was their biggest hit from 1967 when Cream used elements of rock, acid, and pop, producing Sunshine of Your Love. Now, sources connect this song to Jimi Hendrix, either dedicated to or inspired by him. Cream's bassist, Jack Bruce, who we just talked about, said the iconic bass line was inspired by a Jimi Hendrix concert he attended. Hendrix himself performed this selection in his concert, but his interpretation was at a much faster tempo. Not only is this iconic guitar riff of this piece a huge symbol of music from the 60s, but this song became Cream's highest charting song in America, Sunshine of Your Love. were coming to a cello concert tonight, I'm not sure if you were anticipating hearing these kinds of sounds. Alex is playing on a cello that was made back in the 1900s, early 1900s. Whereabouts, Alex?
About 1917.
1917, okay, it's being specific. And what part of the world was that? Quite a mid-drink there.
Around West Germany at the time, yes.
So, it first appeared in our family to me in 3 pieces. I was taking lessons and my cello teacher knew that I needed a new instrument. Little did I know that a new instrument would be an old instrument that was in 3 pieces. But they're made to do that under certain circumstances. They're put together with glue that is meant to snap or pop it should the wood expand or contract so that it doesn't actually damage the wood. And so the instrument was put back together and he gave it to me or sold it to me for $75. And he said, I'll sell it to you on one condition. And that condition was you do not make a profit on it. So I gave it to Alex. So I didn't sell it, I gave it away. And that's done wondrous for him. Now, you've sort of broken what our program was for tonight. You've already teased the audience with 2 selections with the name Hendrix. Do you think we should go for a 3rd one?
I guess we could attempt if is everyone enjoying the rock and roll so far?
Yes.
Well, let's talk about this next one. In March 2005, Q Magazine ranked Purple Haze as #1 on its list of 100 greatest guitar tracks ever. And by the way, we are going to circle this back to Bach, so don't go too far. The song placed at #2 on the Rolling Stones magazine 100 greatest guitar songs of all times list, which noted that the song unveiled a new guitar language charged with spiritual hunger and the poetry possible in electricity and studio technology. It would and continues to capture praises and devoted followers. Now, most important at Woodstock, Purple Haze was part of the set that included the Star Spangled Banner. It was part of the medley lasting over half an hour and included hits like Voodoo Child and Purple Haze and an unaccompanied improvisation. It was the closing act for Woodstock that would delay from Saturday night to Monday morning due to heavy rains. Alex, hit him with Purple Rain. So keeping our feet in the British invasion and returning with our promise to Bach's influence. How can we finish our program? Well, we have to do this selection from the Beatles. Paul McCartney has cited Johann Sebastian Bach as an influence on Blackbird. He recently admitted, or he readily admitted so in a 1997 interview, and I'm going to be quoting Sir Paul directly. The original composition was from a well-known piece by Bach, which I never know the title of, which George and I had learned to play at an early age. He better than me, actually. Part of its structure is this particular harmonic thing between the melody and the bass line, which intrigued me. Bach was always one of our favorite composers. We felt we had a lot in common with him. For some reason, we thought his music was very similar to ours, and we latched on to him amazingly quickly. We also liked the stories of him being a church organist and whopping this stuff out weekly, which was rather similar to what we were doing. We were very pleased to hear that. I developed the melody on the guitar based on the Bach piece and took it somewhere else, took it to another level. Then I just fitted the words to it. Alex, can you tell a little bit about that?
Yes, so that melody is derived from the Bore of Bach's Lute Suite in E minor. The introduction is what is most crucially important. It goes as follows. So there's an upward progression from a B to an E. And remember, we're in E minor, which for those in music theory, is the relative minor of G major, that being the key of Blackbird. So when we make that transposition from E minor to G major and keep that riff, we get.
Now, released in 1968, Blackbird was written by Paul McCartney with minor lyrical contributions from John Lennon and credited to both Lennon and McCartney, while performed as a solo piece by McCartney. The song reflects some of the racial tensions at the time when African Americans would rise to protest and fight for their civil rights. Now, bird, that was a common term applied to a young woman, and blackbird, well, that was McCartney's poetic way to define a black woman. To select a few lines from McCartney's song, blackbird singing in the dead of night, take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life, you were only waiting for this moment to arise. Originally recorded on June 11, 1968 in the Abbey Road studio, it would have been recorded just a little over 2 months after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The version that Alex will play for you is a reimagined setting of this wonderful classic in which, if you listen carefully, you'll hear fractured bits and pieces of this classic selection. Our hope is that this interpretation will honor both the legacy and the spirit of this timeless ballad. Thank you for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you all very, very much.
I do, yes, I do.
Well, then maybe you can tell me a little bit about what's that spiel we do towards the end?
Oh. You don't have your script in front of you?
I have it. What about you?
Which one are we doing?
We're doing the first one.
Okay. Well, the great
You have to understand, this is a really great script. Just stay with us.
the great entertainer Liberace was once asked if he enjoyed giving concerts.
And with a smile and a twinkle in his eyes, he responded,
I don't give concerts, I give a show.
and you know what? It's in that same tradition that we hope you've enjoyed our show here today. We don't look to come and do a concert, a formal concert. What we really want is a conversation. We want to be able to share some of the fun that we've picked up along the way and hope that you found at least maybe one or two selections. We try to provide a broad, different selections of music. Our next piece, well, you know what? Since we're on this whole Jimi Hendrix thing going on with the theme, also was at Woodstock. The jazz and blues legend Billie Holiday, also known as Lady Day, well, she shared the origins of God Bless the Child in her 1956 autobiography, Lady Sings the Blues. That was published 3 years before her untimely death at the age of 44. Now, she got the idea for the song after approaching her mother for a loan. When the mother who had given birth to her, and who had often benefited from her daughter's financial assistance, refused, Holiday shouted back, God bless the child that's got his own. Now, she turned that throwaway line into a frequently covered classic for the ages that offered blacks their own Over the Rainbow, with a grayer-than-silver lining. It was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1976 and included on the Recording Industry Association of America and National Endowment for the Arts Song of the Century, listed at number 58. Number 1 was Over the Rainbow. Blood, Sweat, and Tears recorded this for their 1969 self-titled album, which won Grammy of the Album for the year. In an interview with David Clayton Thomas, who sang lead on the track, he explained that covering the song was not a popular decision, since it was so strongly associated with Billie Holiday, which many considered to be a black anthem. The band knew that they had to do a very different version of the song if it was going to work, so they changed the melody and added horns. In an interview with Clayton Thomas, he said, we came out of it with our own very distinctive version of it, and it stood up very well. And indeed, the band performed this song at their Woodstock appearance back in 1969. Again, thank you all for being such a wonderful audience. bless you all for coming out tonight. Thank you. There are 3 parts to our show. The first part, when you don't show up, is when I put it all together. The second part, you just heard. The third part, I go back to take it apart. Takes me about 30 to 40 minutes, so if you have any questions and if you want to ask Alex, by all means, come on up and speak with him. Thank you again for being such a great audience.